There's a strange experience some people have, but rarely talk about. You remember a world that no longer exists. Not historically. Personally, you remember when people disappeared for hours and nobody worried. When conversations ended and simply faded. When embarrassing moments didn't live forever online. And yet somehow, you also adapted perfectly to a world built on notifications, constant updates, and endless connection. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, you may have lived through one of the most psychologically unusual transitions any generation has experienced. And the strange part is, most Xennials never realized how much that transition shaped who they became, because nothing felt dramatic at the time. It just felt normal. But looking back, a pattern starts to appear. A subtle difference in how you think, how you trust, and how you move through change. You may have felt it without being able to explain it. Too young to fully relate to Gen X, yet never completely aligned with Millennials either. Almost like you learned. Two versions of reality. What makes this important isn't nostalgia, it's timing. Most generations grow up inside one stable environment while their personality forms. Xennials didn't. Childhood happened in a slower analog world. Plans required commitment. Waiting was normal. Boredom existed. Silence existed. And without realizing it, those experiences trained patience and independence in ways that are becoming rare today. Then the world changed. Not slowly, suddenly. Right. As many Xennials entered adulthood, communication, technology, and social life transformed almost overnight. Cell phones spread everywhere. Social media appeared. Connection became constant. And your brain was still developing while this happened. The part responsible for decision-making and emotional adaptation continues maturing into the 20s. Which means Xennials didn't just witness the digital shift, they psychologically adapted to it. While identity was still forming, you were old enough to remember life before constant connection. But young enough to adjust naturally, that created something. Rare you became fluent in two psychological worlds. You can sit comfortably in real conversations, without needing distraction. Yet learning new technology never felt threatening. Adaptation became normal, but adaptation carries a hidden effect. When a person repeatedly adjusts to massive change, the brain quietly learns that stability might not last forever. Many Xennials carry this mindset without noticing. It appears as independence, practicality, and resilience. But underneath is often a quiet awareness that things can change quickly. And that feeling didn't come from technology alone. Just as many were starting careers and building adult stability. Economic uncertainty disrupted expectations. Effort didn't always lead to security. Plans changed unexpectedly. The future began to feel less predictable than promised. Experiences like this shape more than circumstances. They shape perception. You learn to adapt early, to stay flexible, to prepare for change even when life seems stable, which may explain why many Xennials feel slightly out of sync with both older and younger generations. You remember before and after. You appreciate modern convenience, yet still understand what was lost along the way. Comfortable with progress, but quietly aware of its trade-offs. And this ability to live between two realities created something deeper than nostalgia. It changed how identity itself develops, because the real psychological difference of Xennials isn't just what they experienced, but how those experiences quietly reshape trust, connection, and self-understanding over time. And that's where the story becomes more personal. What makes this generation psychologically different begins to show up most clearly in relationships and identity, because Xennials learned connection. In a world where attention was limited, friendships required effort. You showed up at agreed places without confirmation messages. Conversations lived only in memory. Disagreements faded instead of being replayed online. Without realizing it, trust was built through presence, not constant access. Then connection changed. People became permanently reachable. Responses became expected. Silence started to feel meaningful instead of neutral. Social comparison expanded beyond small circles into hundreds of visible lives. For someone who experienced both systems, this creates an unusual balance. Part of you values independence and personal space. Another part understands digital closeness. You can engage online, yet still feel a quiet need to disconnect. In ways younger generations sometimes struggle to understand, it isn't resistance to technology, it's memory. You know what? Connection? Felt like before attention became divided. That memory subtly shapes emotional expectations today. Many Xennials prefer fewer relationships but deeper ones. Less performance, more authenticity. Not because they reject modern culture, but because they experienced a different emotional baseline first. This also influences identity. Growing up before social media meant identity developed privately. Mistakes were temporary. Awkward phases disappeared naturally. Your sense of self formed through experience rather than constant observation. When digital life arrived later, identity suddenly became more visible and documented. So Xennials learned something unusual: how to exist both publicly and privately. You understand self-expression online, but you also remember who you were without an audience. That contrast often creates stronger self-awareness, but also a quiet tension, a feeling of adapting without fully belonging to either world. And maybe that explains a feeling many Xennials recognize but rarely name: standing slightly outside cultural extremes, not fully nostalgic, yet not fully absorbed by constant change either. Able to appreciate progress while still questioning its cost. Comfortable with uncertainty, yet still valuing stability. This isn't confusion, it's perspective formed during transition. Living through changing rules teaches something subtle. Identity doesn't have to stay fixed to survive change. You learned environments shift and people adapt without losing themselves. And maybe that's the defining psychological trait of Xennials. Adaptation without surrender. You remember slower living, yet function in a faster world. Independence and connection exist together. Skepticism and optimism at the same time, not because you chose contradictions, but because history placed you between two eras. If this felt uncomfortably accurate, this channel is probably speaking your language. Subscribing helps you find more conversations like this, exploring the psychology behind experiences many people quietly share. Because as the world keeps accelerating, the perspective shaped during that transition may become more valuable than anyone expected. And if you've ever felt slightly out of place, too analog for one group, too digital for another, it may not mean you don't belong. It may mean you learned how to exist between worlds. And that ability is something the future may need more than we realize.